So these are Billie's words. Glenn Murcutt is a generous and stubborn man. Many of you have experienced his generosity as students or at lectures or as friends. We were lucky enough to be invited by Glenn and Wendy to spend a weekend with him at the Marie Short House, now Murcutt House, in Australia. Billie says, I remember waking up to strange sound of heavy breathing and a kind of pummeling going on right outside our room. Peering out through the shutters, we saw about a dozen kangaroos actually boxing. I realized that the generosity of the house lay in its ability to let the outside in and yet hold us and make us feel protected. Glenn is also a stubborn man because he has always chosen to work from principles. This has, of course, influenced how he works, but more importantly, for the lecture tonight, it has influenced what he does. The Australian Islamic Centre is the expression of stubborn principle that affirms that in this world, if we are to survive, division and fear have no place. I am certain that the Islamic Center will, like the house, let in the outside, but make those who enter feel protected. As we stand on the verge of an inauguration of a man who is stubborn but not generous, we must take the opportunity to celebrate generosity married to stubbornness. And we are thrilled and thankful that you've joined us tonight. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you all.
Well, what does a non-Muslim do to get a project for the Islamic community? Very unusual sort of thing to occur, but what a smart move. Not interested in domes, not interested in minarets, not interested in all the paraphernalia that makes for what would be classically an Islamic centre. I was fortunate enough to chair the jury for His Highness the Aga Khan in one of their rounds in the year 2000 and 2001. During that time, I learnt a lot about Islamic ideas, the idea of entry, the idea of water, idea of light, idea of progression, the idea of the beautiful courtyard, landscape, and those sorts of things. The other thing that I learnt was from His Highness, who had a motherhood statement that said the importance of tolerating other people's beliefs and their way of life. And as chair of the jury, I wasn't afraid to challenge him. I said the use of the word tolerance is abhorred because tolerance implies superiority. Tolerance implies cultural superiority, human superiority, financial superiority even. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, we tolerate a squeaky wheel. It means we like it, we don't like it, but we put up with it. And so what you're saying is we don't like what you think, but we put up with it. That is not the way to be thinking. A wonderful Islamic woman who was also on the jury from Singapore said, I've just written a document on this issue. I said, why don't we both go to His Highness and talk to him about it? And the whole issue of tolerance is a really big problem. And when you hear people talking about tolerance, you start to think that they're doing the right thing, but it's not. It actually is loaded, very deeply loaded. Coming back from that wonderful experience, and I've had to say that I was associated with Billie. Following in the next round, I think it might have been, joining the Aga Khan's jury as well. It is an amazing experience to be on that sort of jury because of the buildings and the people you meet. It's just so wonderful. I came back to Australia and back to practice in the normal grind, always grind, practice, head down and tail up, and weekends work and night work. And any of you young architects in this audience here, if you think 9 to 5 is your time of work in architecture, you better change your course. You become an accountant or something like that, you'll make a lot more money and have to work less. But let me tell you, the joy of practice when you actually do it the way you want to do it, or the way you believe is a reasonable way to do it. And my practice is a sole operation. I don't have partners. I don't have staff. I don't have secretary. It's been very rare for me to have anybody working in the office, and I only did it when I had an office outside my home. But since then, I haven't. But the way I expand the practice is very direct. I look for a very good other architect, one for whom I have great respect, and we work together in absolute collaboration. And I do that with my wife, Wendy Lewin, and I do it with other people from time to time. It's a wonderful way to work, enriching way for me particularly. I love doing that. But I also love the idea of silence, of quietness, time to think. From 2001, when I sat on the last sitting of His Highness's jury, it wasn't until 2004, in about November, that I was contacted by a member from Melbourne of the Islamic community seeking my interest in designing a mosque. And I said to him, why would you ask a non-Muslim to design a mosque? He said, because you may come up with something fresh. You may not feel so bound by all the traditions. I said, look, there are a whole lot of traditions that I will be bound by. I need to know those traditions. And I need to work with a collaborator from the Islamic community. Can you suggest somebody? And they thought about it, contacted me and said, yes, we have found somebody. I said, fine, I'll come down and let's meet and let's discuss it. And so within about an hour, it was the most fantastic meeting. The giving, the generosity of the community towards me was so unbelievable. I didn't know how to react. Like most people who have not had anything to do with the Islamic community, there is a level of anxiety that you don't know what is going to come out of this. And then people said to me, when they heard that I was going down for this, are you sure you want to do this? And I said, look, I am sure that I want to learn about it. I'm sure I want to investigate it. Hakan was fantastic. Hakan Elevli, Turkish by birth, Islamic Australian, a most fantastic young 45-year-old man at the time, architect, absolutely wonderful person, wonderful human. And then I got to meet who was going to be the builder and the project manager. And I said to the project manager, I don't work with project managers. They give me hell. They change everything. They just manipulate everything. He said, I have told the community, it's already stated, that nothing you must provide us with other than money. No gifts of things. This building has to be designed and built according to the architect's design. And I thought, this is absolutely fantastic. Will it really happen like this? Well, let me assure you, the faithfulness in the construction has been unbelievable. The builder, he's also a member of the Islamic community and is also a project manager, has been absolutely extraordinary. There has been a film just completed on my work. It's been running for about 9 years, the filming, just released. And he is on it. And the general public fall in love with him. He is so wonderful, the way he speaks and how he relates to this building. He has sent me messages to say, Glenn, we cannot thank you sufficiently for this building that you've given us. And would you believe it, these messages then finish up, we love you from the bottom of our hearts. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if every client said that? I know that in the United States there's a lot of litigation, and we can't get, working in this country from Australia, we can't even get professional indemnity insurance because of your love of litigation. But we don't like litigation. We think it's a really lousy word and a lousy activity. But it's sort of a game here, isn't it? It's a bit of a game. And I don't like those games. And we have a client base in Melbourne. It's fantastic. Now, the reason that I'm doing the project is that this community are amongst the very possible best clients you could ever want to have. They are a beautiful group of people, Sunni background, unbelievable people. I had a terrible experience through this period where my 46-year-old son, Nicholas, an architect, a fine young architect, somehow or other got lung cancer and died. And that was the most powerful and terrible experience. But do you know that community, they prayed daily. What a beautiful community. What a beautiful group of people. And so in a world today that's hateful, that's against the Islamic community, seeing the worst of what's happening in the world with ISIS and these other terrible organisations, my community tell me this group of people are simply criminals and they're nothing to do with Islam. And they don't know how to deal with it because they know there are Maddies in every society. And in their society, they're concerned that if they speak out too powerfully, that they're going to be killed themselves. It's a very difficult time. But what a wonderful time to be designing a mosque that is in Australia, not in the Islamic world. In the Islamic world, the mosque that has the courtyard that is so beautiful that you enter, that might have some wonderful trees in it and water gardens before you enter the mosque through a doorway, is not necessarily appropriate in the Western world because you go through a doorway that makes it exclusive, that to enter that space into that courtyard, one feels the idea that one might be imposing, one is out of place. And to be able to go into a space like that freely, you have to be from the Arab world or the community. So I've had to rethink the courtyard at the entry area. I've had to rethink the idea of the minaret because they're all symbols that are powerful symbols that mean very different things to the other than the Islamic society to that of the Islamic society. When I asked them, why would you have a minaret? They said, well, we always have a minaret. And I said, but what's the minaret for? And they said, well, we just have it. I said, but where does it come from? And they said, well, it's the calling of prayers. So I said, well, nominate me the person in the community who's going to call the prayers. And they said, well, nobody's going to call the prayers. And I said, well, what's going to happen? Is the music going to be played? No, nothing's going to be played. So what's the minaret for? And they said, well, it's just a symbol. And I said, it's obsolete. It's totally obsolete. You don't need the minaret. It may be a problem in the Western world to have the minaret because it means something different to the Western world to that of your world. They said, well, what do you mean it's obsolete? Well, I said, it's like putting a tail on every human and asking them to walk around the streets with a tail on, that it's also obsolete. And I said, this is a ridiculous notion to have the mosque, the minaret. But I said, what I can do is I can take the wall up and I can lift the wall up and we can have a crescent on top of the wall. Today, that wall is known as the minaret to the community of the Islamic community, and to the Australian community, it's just known as a wall that picks up a crest at the top of it. There is no dome on the building. The dome, of course, was part of the idea of the sky dome, and it was painted gold in some places because gold represents paradise. These are all very normal sorts of things. But I started to investigate a number of things in the Islamic world. And I found that the great Mosque of Cordoba didn't have a dome. It had a series of beautiful lunettes, wonderful lunettes. It had a series of spaces that did not read inside as a dome, but the columns were there. And it seemed to me that to structure the inside much closer to the Islamic world was important. And for the outside and the entry, also being outside the Islamic world was important. And the Imam then came into the whole notion of this and said, look, I have structured in Melbourne 3 monthly meetings between the heads of each of the faiths so that we can discuss the things that are in common, not the things that separate us. And I invite all of you and all faiths to come and use this mosque for all faiths. You come in here and pray to your God in this building. And to that extent, we've got a restaurant for the public. We have a wonderful park in front, and now the council, who were in opposition to the building in the beginning, are now coming to us and saying, how can we contribute? And in front of the main building of the mosque, for 250 metres, we'll have the most beautiful grassed area going right back to the street, where you can, from the street, you can look straight into the mosque, straight into the ground floor, right through into facing the Mecca, with a water garden at the end. So there is nothing hidden, everything is open so that it can be understood, so that there's no secrecy. They are loving it. And in this grassed area, I'm going to be putting in water pipes at a dimension all the way through, horizontally across, that are going to release water at a greater rate than the rest of it. So the grass will have a series of darker green lines running through it, and those lines will be set apart for the market. So every Friday morning, there's going to be a market from the local produce coming in, and that market will be selling food and plants and other things to the community, as well as the food for the restaurants that is going to be there. The imam is going to live on the site. There are going to be community meeting rooms. There's going to be a basketball court. There are women's areas. There are men's areas. And I have also included another thing, and that is a staircase that links the men's area and the women's area, so that at some stage in the cultural time of change, any man wishes to go up and pray with the women, or any of the women who want to come down and pray with the men, that might be side by side rather than front and back, can happen, because there's nothing in the Quran that says anything about the prayers of separation. It is a cultural thing. In Mecca, they all pray in the same spaces. So that's how the project came to me. Working with Harkin has been a fantastic joy. He's taken the brunt of day-to-day things. I visit the site for 2 days, 1 day, 2 days every month, spend long hours down there, stay overnight, back on the site early in the morning, working pretty hard all day. And I also send a lot of information down from Sydney almost every 2 days, giving the information. So that's just an introduction.
Glenn. No, actually, I had questions for Glenn, but I asked them behind the scene, and he seems to have taken care of all of my questions. I wanted to needle him, but I'd love to open this up if people want to ask questions. Certainly, there are many questions that are out there. I'm sure of that. One of the ones is, at least that I'd asked him previously, was it's now 2006 since the first ideas were there, and 10 years later. Are there any things that you would do differently? And Glenn answered that very clearly. It's a different time, but
Yeah, well, I think that even more so now than even when I thought about it in 2006, which is 10 years ago, the idea of the mosque and not having the courtyard in the front, but having the courtyards towards Mecca, is still relevant, and I believe will remain relevant. The minaret that I've done, I think, is as far as I was prepared to go, and it's as far as I would be prepared to go now. The lanterns worked out better than I ever had anticipated, so I hope I could do them as well today as I did then. I think that most of the things in the mosque itself are coming together reasonably well. I guess there are a few things that have taken place that I would like to have a little bit more time to think about, had time, and that is some of all the electrical metering, which I had no idea were going to have boxes that are this deep, by this high, by about that sort of width. And to get those in, I've had to build a concrete element that to actually contain about 4 things. There's meters for water, there are meters for power, there are meters for all sorts of things, and that's it's a pity, but it's not. Look, Renzo Piano said to me a number of years ago, he said, Glenn, you and I know that you must, in design, hang on to all those things that are important and be prepared to let go of some of the things that are unimportant. And that's a really big lesson for an architect, and that is to hang on, be determined about the things that are really important, and to be able to let go about the things that are not quite so important.
yeah. And we see that in your work and this issue of working from principle. So thank you. If we can turn the lights on, and I know people may need to go. Glenn, you were supposed to have been exhausted, not able to manage this thing.
Yeah.
You did fantastically.
Yeah,
I'm sure you'd be happy
this
to
Fiji
take...
water, I recommend these. It's the hibiscus.
Brought it over from
It's hibiscus Fiji water. Recommend it to everybody.
But I think we should try to take a few questions, because I certainly have had my day in court, and Glenn's had good shot here. It's fantastic that you've been able to be here with us tonight. I'm sure everyone knows your work, but it was great to have this discussion. May we turn it over and see if there are any questions?
Yes, somebody here?
Do stand up and speak very loudly, or Mike could come to you.
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, the question is, how much of the design work was done during construction? Every aspect of a drawing is about design. And so during construction, there were detail modifications sometimes to, for example, the lanterns. There were modifications to the glass blades that were timber blades, and we discussed this with the community and said the glass blades are going to be 5 times the big timber blades, but the maintenance is basically nil on them. They decided the glass was appropriate, so we had to then design all the octopi, these things, claws that were specially made. It cost us $150 for the pattern for the new these new spiders. That's all it cost, and we were able to get a whole lot made up for it to make that work. So that was one aspect that was a design variation and a detail changed during construction. We hadn't detailed, for example, some of the escape door push handles. I hated the ones we had in Australia, and then I looked up the whole of American push handles, and there's a beautiful one that just comes down and it goes horizontally and back into the door, and it's very beautiful. And I said, I don't know how we can get these. And then I looked up a company in Australia, and they were importing them, and so we found them, and so that was a later development. The carpet selection was something we did on the way through, but we had already chosen the stone floor, so that was already done. The carpet had to be matched to that. There were not a lot of detailed changes, but the minbar was changed. I changed that quite considerably because it was a little too complicated. Previously it had glass on it as well, and I decided it was much stronger if we had just this staircase that came up and cantilevered out, and I used this big wall coming back as the stability for this whole cantilever and against the wall of the minbar as well. And so it's much stronger as a consequence. But that was a change detail through construction. It was also much more economical. There were some of the furniture there's very little furniture, by the way, in a mosque, but there are tables. So I got a blue stone table, which is about almost the size of this in one big slab, and underneath it has a curvature underneath and just two big ends on it. That curvature is expressed at the end. That was all made and is ready to be installed. That was done during the construction. But on the whole, most of the things had been thought out during the design process. Remember, a mosque is not a hugely complicated space. What it is a space that needs to be fairly clear of things. There's going to be some shelves on the walls. It's going to be used with an Australian native plant tree, which is the Corymbia maculata. It's commonly called the spotted gum. It's a beautiful hardwood, absolutely beautiful, and they will just be planks that are suspended off the wall by 25 millimetres. There's going to be, usually you can see in churches what the hymn will be. Well, they'll have what will be spoken at a given point, and that will be almost like a clock at the end, and the numbers will come up electronically on it. So that's all there is really. It will be a large-scale Quran and a smaller scale Quran in the room. That's basically it. Once you're inside that mosque, it's just you and the Quran and the people and the imam. So yes, there were some things done, but most of my projects, much of it is already thought out at the time it starts construction. Yes. Is a marvellous tool, absolutely superb tool. I use a computer for word processing, but you're not going to take away hand drawing from me. we have some of the world's, since human occupation of the planet, silliest buildings that have come as a consequence of stupidly handling a computer that can do the most silly things and achieve the most silly buildings on this planet. Drawing by hand, designing by hand, detailing by hand is something that I have no idea why it's been eliminated from most schools. I have no idea. It is so fast. It is so thoughtful. It is so expressive. You can go so quickly at it. You don't have to set up anything. And if a client doesn't like it, that's all right. When a client doesn't like what you've done, that gives you the opportunity of making it a lot better. You don't put your tail between your legs and get cross about it. You say, fantastic, it gives me another 3 weeks at working at it and making it a lot better. So you capitalise on making it better. So I have no difficulty with that. But the process of working is, I obviously get a brief, but I spend time on the site. I get surveys done of the topography, make sure I'm building on the right site, by the way, very important. There are lots of examples of having been buildings starting on the wrong site.
Okay.
And the lawyers love that. But you start to deal with the actual design elements and you start to understand the principles. You understand the principles of prospect, understanding the principles of refuge, understanding the principles of structure, understanding the principles of shelter, understanding the principles of light movement, understanding the principles of solar movements, understanding water table, understanding hydrology, understanding geology, understanding flora, understanding fauna, understanding history of the site, both Aboriginal and European history of the site, understanding how the site has been modified, understand if it's been used by farming, you can't put footings down only 450 millimetres, you have to go down a metre. So there are a whole lot of things you have to understand. Then you have to understand about the lighting of the house and how the light is going to bounce off different parts of the wall. It is a very wonderful occupation that requires a lot of understanding of all of the elements that come together. And they come together as you work through. They're not just one at a time. You've got to be thinking about all these things at the same time and bring them together. And you must think three-dimensionally. You must not think two-dimensionally. The computer allows you to think two-dimensionally. What it does, you start to define a plane, and then you define another plane, or you design to put a roof in, and you don't know quite what it's going to look like, so you project it up. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Why you don't think?
Okay. That's right. It's 8:19. I'm going to let you go till 8:30 because otherwise we're going to put you in the hospital. Or do you want to go? Anyone here Buckminster Fuller the way he went? Oh my God!
I don't want to go into the costs of American hospitals.
Okay. Okay.
You come to Australia on national health and it's wonderful.
But we do need to get a couple more questions in because I think it's important.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, thank you. How important do you think is the quality of human relationships for the realization of a building?
What are the quality of human relationships?
Yeah, the relationships with, the client, the builder.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I was a young architect, there was a general feeling that the architect was the superior being. And if the builder had done something not quite right, it was the prerogative of the architect to come and kick the wall down or break it or what have you. Couldn't be further from the reality. You keep the client and the builder apart. Really important. You, as the architect, are the one. You're the one that actually coordinates the ideas between the client and yourself, and then conveying to the builder. So the builder only has to address the issues through one channel, that is the architect. Now, I don't know if it happens in the United States, but there has been a great loss in my country with the advent of the project manager. As I said to you earlier, I don't work with project managers. I'm the project manager. I manage the project the whole way through. I manage the finances, I manage the construction the details, I manage the progress certificates, I manage all those. And if you let go of the management of the site, you're going to get a huge compromise. Because if the project manager is going to have it there, your specified beautiful 600 by 300 satin coloured white tiles, and he's going to put in 25 by 25 purple tiles, because he got them at a rate 10% of what your tile cost. So you need to have control of how the building is going to finish up. In terms of my relationship with the clients, I never give a client a drawing, and that is fait accompli. I'm sitting with the client opposite me here with the drawings in front here of tracing paper, not a computer, tracing paper, and we're going over with a pencil, not a stylus, we're going over pencil to say, if we move this way, this is what's going to happen. If we move this way, this is what is likely consequence. So at the end of the process, most of my clients feel that they've had a huge part of the process of design. Now, I'm very conscious that I don't give them an alternative that's going to end up being terrible. I'm very careful about that. I'm giving them a limited number of alternatives. But they feel they're getting good alternatives, not terrible alternatives, or terrible for me to have to try and work out later. So we're working together very closely all the way through. Today, most of my friends are my ex-clients. And a number of my ex-clients ask me to come and look after their buildings when they go away to go and live in. And I've even been given a building by an ex-client. The Simpson Lee house is now my house. I need another house like a hole in the head, but it's a wonderful thing to have. All I'm saying about that is the relationship I have with the client. With my builders, I have a fantastic relationship. I come from a family where my father was a builder. From the age of 12 to 18, I worked in my father's joinery shop, building box frame windows, staircases, casement windows, awning windows. By the time I was 18, I'd built all the windows. I'd laid bricks, I bent reinforcing, poured concrete, and excavated down to rock for footings. I understood those things. So coming from a building family gave me great respect for every builder. I have enormous respect for a good builder. I have an absolute abhorrent feeling about a builder who's going to take me for a ride. I don't deal with them. They're the builders that give you a suicide price, and that silly clients take the suicide price, and you pay for it finally as an architect. You need to get a builder that's going to price it properly, that's going to be a fair price, that the builder is going to get out of it without losing money. So the relationship is very important. I can go and have a sauna with my finished builders on a Friday night. I might have had a few too many drinks, so I can't go home and drive. I've got to wait till midday the next day, so I wait till midday the next day. And I can get there on Monday morning and say, Yoko, look at it, point to it, and say, I understand. I don't have to say anything. He fixes it. And that's the sort of relationship. I've developed a very wonderful relationship with Finnish builders, English builders, Australian builders, Dutch builders, Croatian builders.
Okay, next one. Okay, we got two more questions, and I got to put the, you've got to throw something at you.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Just a minute.
Thank you. And it's sort of a two questions. One would be
I only allowed one.
Yeah.
okay. One would be to what extent or would this building work anywhere else on another site? And if so, how would it respond to a different position?
Well,
It's not a new lecture, Glenn. This is just,
okay.
okay.
The answer is it could work on the site next door. Because it's the same orientation, it's the same outlook, it's the same distance from the street, it's the same topography, so it could work there. But if the site was falling very steeply, the answer is you'd have to think something differently. If the site was wider than its depth and the Mecca was to the rear, you don't have all the other buildings faces to Mecca, so you'd have to rethink that as well. So the answer is there may be the odd situation that you could replicate the building somewhere else, but this was very specifically designed from solar, from wind, water access, flooding, those sorts of things. So the answer in principle is very few places would it be appropriate.
That was fast. Good. Okay, one more. It's nearly 8:30.
Yes, there's one here.
Okay.
No, the answer is sort of. I was raised in a family where we lived in a very wonderful Australian forested native plant environment. And I learnt the botanical names because when I was 9 years old, my father used to take me out at night time after dark, well after dark, and we used to go to adjacent properties around us and steal soil from below septic tanks because the septic tank effluent was so high in nutrients, the native plants were dying. So we collected this soil, we identified exactly where it was, and we had tube stock, if you know what tube stock is in plants, and we put a seed in that higher nutrient soil, but having, when I say put the seed in, having taken, for example, Eucalyptus botryoides, Eucalyptus maculata, one of the eucalyptus families, and we would take the seed pod and put it in the oven and fire it. Or if it was going to be cordyline, then we would put it through vinegar because the vinegar would break the outer shell that would allow then the propagation. And so by propagating this tube stock into this sort of height, then my dad would put on it the botanical name, and we go back and plant those plants exactly in the place we took the soil. And today there are Angophora costatas that are in the order of 25 metres tall. There are Eucalyptus maculata, Corymbia maculata, that are in the order of 30 metres to 35 metres tall, and nobody knows how they ever got there. But that's how I learnt about Australian landscape. We were not planting begonias and petunias or zinnias or any of the other plants. We were propagating plants, native plants in Australia, so I have a very, very, very good working knowledge of plants, and so I know what sort of plants I want to do, what they do, where they will do. And for example, the Melia azaradark, or the commonly called the white cedar, also called the lilac tree, has the most beautiful small flower that has lilac perfume in springtime. Then the leaf comes out almost like a Japanese maple leaf that gives beautiful dappled shade, very beautiful dappled shade, but the leaf moves out like this. And in wintertime, it's our only truly deciduous tree. We have a number of semi-deciduous trees, which means to say they lose their leaves for about a week at a time, week to 2 weeks, not like 4 months or 5 months. The Melia azaradark loses it for 5 months. Okay. And then out of it comes beautiful, beautiful golden yellow seeds for the whole of winter.
Okay, look, I'm so sorry to call a halt to this thing because literally
Two minutes over.
Yeah, well, it's because I said stop. Glenn, thank you. This is an amazing experience.